In 1907, British-Hungarian archaeologist R.L. Stein returned to Asia for his most famous expedition ever, in search for evidence of the greatest lost civilizations in human history. Upon his arrival in Donghuang, he met a Buddhist monk
who had told him that he had discovered a secret library known as the Cave of 1,000 Buddhas. Okay? In that library, up in this cave up in the mountains, in that library, he found these manuscripts from all over the world, from different like Hindu texts and all these things, but one of them had a map, had an ancient map in it, and the map depicted Atlantis as a region that existed from west of the Pillars of Hercules as a region, all the way to the Yucatan. I believe that Atlantis and the Athenians were and potentially Egypt, I believe that represented the height of the greatest level these civilizations ever reached in our history.
What if I told you that everything you believed about the origin of human civilization was wrong? What if I told you our early ancestors had elders from a lost land that taught them how to build society? And for centuries, we've dismissed these stories as myth and fiction. What if Atlantis was the home of these elders, and they are our ancient ancestors from a once great civilization? Of course you wouldn't believe it. It's crazy, but maybe just crazy enough to be true. In this series, we'll take a deep dive into the sunken city to find the truth. With that being said, welcome to the Odd Chronicles of Atlantis, Part 1. Around 600 BC, an Athenian statesman, Solon, traveled to Egypt where he learned of Atlantis from the pharaohs. He translated the Egyptian inscriptions from the walls of their temple and brought the story back to Athens. The story of Atlantis was passed down to Plato, and he wrote of it in his works Critias and Timaeus. Mainstream historians believe this to be entirely fiction, but others would argue that Plato and Solon were telling the truth, and that the ancient Egyptians actually knew of Atlantis' existence. Plato writes in Timaeus,
"Then listen, Socrates, to a tale which, though strange, is certainly true, having been attested by Solon, who was the wisest of the 7 sages."
He establishes right at the beginning that the story he is about to tell is most certainly true. Plato includes an interesting paragraph before getting into the story about Solon, writing,
"If Solon had only, like other poets, made poetry the business of his life, and had completed the tale which he brought with him from Egypt, in my opinion, he would have been as famous as Homer or Hesiod or any poet."
Basically saying that if Solon had finished his epic, we would remember him in the same way we remember the great ancient Greek writers. I don't believe it's because it was a great work of fiction, but he would have brought forward one of the most important counts in all of history. Plato continues,
"And what was the tale about, Critias?" said Amenander. "About the greatest action which the Athenians ever did, and which ought to have been the most famous, but through the lapse of time and the destruction of the actors, it has not come down to us." "Tell us," said the other, "the whole story, and how and from whom Solon heard this veritable tradition."
Again, Plato emphasizes the truth of the story he is about to tell, saying, quote, "this veritable tradition." Plato writes saying that Solon traveled to the city of Sais, where we pick up the story again.
"To this city came Solon, and was received there with great honor. He asked the priests who were most skillful in such matters about antiquity, and made the discovery that neither he nor any other Hellene knew anything worth mentioning about the times of old. On one occasion, wishing to draw them on to speak of antiquity, he began to tell about the most ancient things in our part of the world, about Pharaonius, who is called the first man, and about Niobe, and after the deluge, of the survival of Deucalion and Pyrrha, and he traced the genealogy of their descendants, and reckoning up the dates, tried to compute how many years ago the events of which he was speaking happened."
Here Plato mentions the deluge, or the great flood that happened before their time, the same flood that is mentioned throughout many ancient texts, most famously in the Bible. The story continues.
"Thereupon one of the priests, who was of a very great age, said, 'O Solon, Solon, you Hellenes are never anything but children, and there is not an old man among you. Solon in return asked him what he meant. "I mean to say," he replied, "that in mind you are all young. There is no old opinion handed down among you by ancient tradition, nor any science which is hoary with age. And I will tell you why. There have been, and will be again, many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes."
It's very clear what the priest is saying here, that the Athenians do not remember the times before the Great Flood, and that mankind has been destroyed many times over. The priest continues referencing the story of Plato and how the earth caught fire from heavenly bodies, saying,
"Now this has the form of a myth, but really signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth, which recurs after long interval."
The priest is telling Solon that the story the Athenians have of Plato is not just a myth, but actually happened and the earth was set ablaze, not by a mythical chariot, but by a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth, meaning something fell from the heavens, most likely a comet or meteor, and set the earth on fire. The priest goes on to say this,
"And whatever happened either in your country or in ours, or in any other region of which we are informed, if there were any actions noble or great, or in any other way remarkable, they have all been written down by us of old, and are preserved in our temples. Whereas just when you and other nations are beginning to be provided with letters and the other requisites of civilized life, after the usual interval, the stream from heaven, like a pestilence, comes pouring down, and leaves only those of you who are destitute of letters and education. And so you have to begin all over again like children, and know nothing of what happened in ancient times, either among us or among yourselves."
What's interesting about this last part here is that the priest says, after the usual interval, almost saying that they know after a certain amount of time, mankind is wiped out and we have to start all over again. The priest continues to tell Solon,
"In the first place, you remember a single deluge only, but there were many previous ones, and this was unknown to you, because for many generations the survivors of that destruction died, leaving no written word."
Is this what would happen to our civilization? All paper records would be burnt up or washed away. No electronic records would survive. After 12,000 years, would there be any record of us to be found? It's hard to say. In this next part, he gives Solon a date for the start of their civilization.
"For the sake of the goddess, who is the common patron and parent and educator of both our cities, she founded your city 1,000 years before ours, receiving from the earth and Hephaestus the seed of your race, and afterwards she founded ours, of which the constitution is recorded in our sacred registers to be 8,000 years old. As touching your citizens of 9,000 years ago, I will briefly inform you of their laws and of their most famous action. The exact particulars of the whole we will hereafter go through at our leisure in the sacred registers themselves."
A few interesting things in this paragraph here. Plato gives us a date for the start of these civilizations, 9,000 and 8,000 years before Solon's journey to Egypt, putting it at about 11,600 years before present day. Remember that year, it will be important later. The previous writings were just a lead up to now, where the Egyptian priest tells of Atlantis. He says,
"For these histories tell of a mighty power which unprovoked made an expedition against the whole of Europe and Asia, and to which your city put an end. This power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean, for in those days the Atlantic was navigable, and there was an island situated in front of the straits, which are by you called the Pillars of Heracles. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and was the way to other islands. And from these you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent, which surrounded the true ocean. For this sea, which is within the Straits of Heracles, is only a harbour having a narrow entrance, but that other is a real sea, and the surrounding land may be most truly called a boundless continent."
I find it very interesting that the Egyptians had such accurate geographical knowledge of the earth at a time when America was supposedly undiscovered. But here the priest says that the Mediterranean is just a harbor, and on the other side of the true ocean, the Atlantic, is most truly a boundless continent. The full extent of the Egyptians' knowledge and and where they got it could be a topic for an entirely new video, but their connections to Atlantis, along with many other cultures, is truly mesmerizing. However, the story continues.
Now in this island of Atlantis, there was a great and wonderful empire, which had rule over the whole island and several others, and over parts of the continent. And furthermore, the men of Atlantis had subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Heracles as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. This vast power, gathered into one, endeavored to subdue at a blow our country and yours, and the whole of the region within the straits. And then, Solon, your country shone forth in the excellence of her virtue and strength among all mankind. But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. For which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way, and this was caused by the subsidence of the island.
He says here that Atlantis sank into the depths of the sea in a single day and night. How is that possible? Well, 11,600 years ago, something interesting happened to the Earth. The Younger Dryas period ended. The Younger Dryas period, which occurred around 12,900 to 11,600 years ago, was a return to glacial conditions which temporarily reversed the gradual climatic warming of our planet. The period started when fragments of a comet or meteor impacted the Earth and caused an impact winter, rapidly cooling the Earth and leading to the extinction of megafauna all over the planet. As the Younger Dryas came to an end, the Earth began a rapid rewarming and glacial dams broke, leading to massive flooding. Massive flooding? Sounds familiar. Modern geological evidence is beginning to line up perfectly with exactly what Plato wrote almost 3,000 years ago. Remember, Solon traveled to Egypt around 600 BC, which would put the destruction of Atlantis at 9,600 BC, or 11,600 years ago, right at the end of the Younger Dryas. In the next video, we'll dive even deeper into some of the physical evidence we have for the possible location of Atlantis and the impact its people had on early civilization. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you.